I am Linda Gregory Cook, and I'm an RDT VCT past president of the association. I was president from 1995 to 97. However, let's go back to the beginning. It's really important for this journey that I took that I don't begin with where I graduated from, but where I began, because it's been really a rather incredible journey. And it's important because I belong to another time. And the organization is entering a whole new era. So I would like to begin at the beginning and make it very brief, but tell you who I am. I'm a girl from the Midwest. I was born and raised in Springfield, Illinois. I was in a neighborhood of immigrants from Germany and from Italy, primarily. I had a very small world. I was an only child. It was before television, actually, and the radio was important. Playing outside was important. It was safe to play outside. I grew up with the movies. Roy Rogers was my hero, and my favorite book was The Secret Garden. And that's important to my story, because in The Secret Garden, the little girl wanted to go through the door that was locked. And in the movie, which was black and white, when she opened that door and went through, it became Technicolor. And she saw the world. She saw so much more. And I have to believe that it's that kind of childhood experience that gave me the security, the curiosity that led me to do what I did. Because if you ask me why I did it, how I did it, which I know you will ask, I'll have answers. But I just wanted you to know that this is where I came from. Springfield, by the way, was the town of Abraham Lincoln. So not only did he live there, but he is buried there. And that was the heart and soul of the town. So you can see where I would have been infused with all sorts of desire for things being made right, saying things being made whole, looking for the good of people, how to bring people together. So I grew up with that in my hometown. I had no theater experience. My high school didn't offer theater. I debated, but no theater. And it really wasn't until I, on my own, asked if I could put together a scene to present at State to do a dramatic reading. And my teacher said, "Want to do that? Okay." So I worked up a scene from Anastasia, and I placed, and I had no training, no nothing. The judge was a professor from the University of Illinois, and she saw me because I did it with a Russian accent. And she offered me to come to their summer theater program at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. So that is what I did after I was a senior. And based on that, they offered me a scholarship for 4 years to the university. So I went to the University of Illinois on scholarship for 4 years. And by way of a phone call from the head of the department, I received a fellowship to Tulane University, where I did my master's work. Now, that too is a part of shaping who I am, because Illinois was very traditional theater, very solid work, solid skills. I walked into Richard Schechner at Tulane University. He was just beginning his ideas for environmental theater. And all of the men there, and it was mostly men, were very much into the Eastern European studies. They were experimenting. It was alive and vibrant. And here I was, as square as could be. So what I did was I became an editorial assistant for the Tulane Drama Review. And I got to read all these marvelous articles from abroad. And I was able to work with Richard, who became my mentor. I never bought into or participated in his experiments, but I applauded him from the side. And he kicked my ass. He really did. He said, think for yourself, find something that you want to do and go for it. So I got very enamored of Bertolt Brecht. And I thought, oh, I love this, because Brecht allows you to step back and see more. And I thought that was wonderful. And you could play many roles, and you could really make a difference. And you could really see how social change was possible through theater. So that was part of my journey. My education was really giving me opportunities to meet people along the way. And I think that that's what's happened in our organization as well. You adopt different mentors. I also had an experience that for me was life-changing. At Illinois, it was the summer of 1961. I joined a tour of Europe, and I went with friends and people, mostly from the Chicago area. It was a group of students, 2.5 months. I had never really been anywhere. And that summer of 1961, there was an Iron Curtain. And before we got to Prague, they went off the road and took us to a place called Theresienstadt, which was a concentration camp. And many of my friends in the tour had relatives who had perished there. It was mainly for artists and for people who were children. We just wandered it. It was not a site you go to. The groundskeeper let us wander around. And the things I saw just absolutely blew my mind. And then we ended up in East Berlin, and I found myself in East Berlin the day before they closed it off. And that took my breath away, because I thought how quickly we can lose what we have. We can lock people up, we can kill people. The loss of freedom, the intolerance. I mean, I was just hammered by it. And after that, I had a chance to go to Amsterdam to visit, and they said, well, we'll just stop by the Anne Frank house. This is before it was a museum. And the housekeeper said, oh, come in, you can wander around and just do what you want to do. So just a handful of us got to wander through Anne Frank's house. And I have to tell you, those 3 experiences have made my life what it is, because I have always felt I have to correct what I see is wrong. So that's basically my journey and my education. What happened was, after that, I went up to the University of Connecticut, and I was there for quite some time. And it was during that period of time, from 1968 to 83, that I had many opportunities that I took advantage of to go into the prisons. I spent a total of 9 years in a variety of prisons doing the work that I chose to do. And what I chose to do was sociodrama. That was basically the kind of work I did. In terms of where I worked after that, because we will go back to the prisons, I returned to New Orleans in 1983. And what I had learned from my prison years was that they were once children. And I made a promise to the inmates, I made a promise to myself that what I would do was, anytime I had the opportunity to work with children, to try to stop this school to prison, school to jail cycle, to help children who live in poverty, who have experienced trauma, that I would change my work, and instead of working in the prisons, I would work in the schools. And that is what I did. I went into the public schools. They allowed me to work both as a drama teacher, artist, and as a drama therapist. I worked with the alternative high school for all the expelled students. I also worked in the juvenile detention center for those awaiting court dates. I retired. Sure, I retired. I retired in 2004. In 2005, we had Katrina. And Hurricane Katrina, I looked around at my city of New Orleans and all the trauma of all ages and thought, oh, there's more to do here. So I was hired to go back into the schools, work with staff, and help retrain them. How do you deal with the trauma while you're also being expected to teach students who for many just could not possibly learn? So drama therapy was a very vital force in the schools, and they allowed me to do that work. That's basically what has happened, is I've continued doing that kind of work, and I think that more should do that. So I'm retired, but not really. That's my journey.
Thank you, Linda. That was
when I went to the University of Connecticut at Storrs, it was a fairly large faculty, but there were only just a few, actually 2 women on it. It was all men. Typical for its time. Again, it's a different time. I also was an adjunct because my husband was a professor, and you could not, because of nepotism, be on full time. So what had happened was the Kellogg Foundation had granted the university money to do work regionally in fine arts and corrections. They wanted them to do something to help the incarcerated. So they went to the Department of Music and they said, oh, we would love to perform. We'll go in and perform. Then they went to the art department. The art department said, we'll decorate the prisons. We'll get prints and we'll make everything much nicer for them to look at. Then they came to our department. Total silence. You're familiar with that, right? So I raised my hand and I said, I'd like to do something. 2 weeks later, I found myself across the desk from the Commissioner of Corrections for the state of Connecticut. Little knowing that this was one of the great prison reform men of his time. His name was Ellis McDougall. He ended up reforming 5 states in corrections. And I just happened to be there at the right time and took the risk of saying, I want to go and do something. He said, what do you want to do? And I said, go in. I want to go in. And he said, okay, because he too was a risk taker. Got him into some trouble, controversy. But anyway, 3 weeks later, together with my husband, who did go in with me, and a stash of video equipment that we had, we walked into the minimum security prison, which was called the Farm, and we found 50 inmates there waiting for us. And that began a real I want to call it a love affair because it was a family. It was a new family for all of us. We found ourselves so welcomed, so needed. It's only in retrospect, and as you go back and look over time, it was indeed a groundbreaking program nationally. There were a few people working in prisons, but the kind of program you're going to hear me say we developed was truly different. It was fully supported by the University of Connecticut. It was fully supported by the state of Connecticut. We coordinated everything we did. I didn't report to anybody. There was trust. Everybody was focused on a single mission, which was to rehabilitate and to provide hope and identity to men that had been forgotten. Now, as an aside, yes, it was the 70s. And yes, I had a mini skirt. Okay, so you'll probably see it. It's fine because we were about getting to know each other. What was unique about it? There were several things. One, it was a voluntary program. It was inclusive. And as it turned out, it was the only program in both minimum and maximum prisons where all the populations would work together. That means sex offenders were able to be in our group and they were able to work with each other. That was extraordinary. That was noticed. I used sociodrama, not truly really knowing what it was because we're looking at 1970 when I went in. We weren't even an organization till 79. But I had read about Moreno and we knew what it was. We chose to do that. We wanted to work with groups. Within that group, because they were at minimum security, we only wanted to work with original material. So we used their poetry, their short stories, and above all, the role plays that we were able to get them to create and put on the video. That was where distancing comes in, because the video camera was not a recorder of the work, it was an actual player in the process. In other words, they would role play maybe a scene of a family in a kitchen and a conflict. And after a few minutes, not 15, never 15-minute role plays. After a few minutes, we'd stop and the inmate who'd be behind the camera taking it, we'd talk about it. And for them, it was looking at something objectively. We weren't there to critique them. We weren't there to make them drama artists. They were looking at real life situations, many of which they couldn't handle. And then we would do role reversal, and we would do replays and repeats. And out of that came so many stories and so many common grounds that the communication just flowed. It just flowed back and forth. And we were able to put together scenes from their stories, their poetry. They could dramatize, and they let us take them out on tour. We would take them around to Kiwanis, to the universities, to let the community see the value, the worth, the feelings, the ideas these men had. And moreover, they wanted us to take them and transform them into training tapes for the correctional officers, which we did. And the inmates helped us with that. So we were working with the director of staff development. We were looking at where the problems were that they were having, the issues, same issues we're having today, by the way. We worked it out and we put together videotapes that were not a how to do it, but they were dramatizations, they were stories, like watching television. And we produced many, many of them. And at the minimum security facility, they gave us, because it was an old Shaker farm, they gave us a chicken processing plant, 6,000 square feet, so we wouldn't have to keep hauling our video equipment, and let us turn it into a studio. It was just bloody marvelous. We went 2 nights a week to the minimum. We did that from 1970 to 71. And then we added in the maximum prison because they wanted us to come up there. They had a very progressive man who was wonderful. He was also the very first African-American warden of a prison in Connecticut. I'm happy to also say both the commissioner and that warden became presidents of the American Correctional Association. So they were leaders in their own profession. We were able at maximum prison to begin to bring in students, grad students. And the university said, well, if they're getting this experience, we will give them academic credit. So we found ourselves able to start probably the only early drama therapy master's program in the country. This is before we were even an organization, but we had about 9 students who went through the program. So all of this was being watched and evaluated by Kellogg Foundation. And I have to tell you, they certainly gave us a lot of recognition. In 1971, we were invited to present at the American Correctional Association in Miami Beach, and we presented media in corrections, and we talked to about 500 men, mostly men in the audience, from all over the country about how important it was to have the arts, drama therapy, and media, the media in corrections. So everything came in partnership, many partnerships. Then I thought, well, maybe I better have a child. So I thought I should probably do that. But before I did that, they said, no, you got to do more. We don't want this program to end. So what we did was, and I encourage other people to do this, we went to DC and we started knocking on doors. And we knocked at the right door. We were at HEW when they had a program called MDTA, Manpower Training and Development. It was for staff training. And this man was from Rhode Island. And we were supposed to help prisons in New England. So we told him who we were and what we'd like to do. And he said, oh, I'd like you to do that in Rhode Island at our maximum prison. He said, you want to do that? And we said, all right, give us the forms. We'll fill out the grants and all of that. He said, no. I know what you want to do. And I know what you've done. He said, here's the budget page. Tell me what you need to go produce a film and to work with our inmates at the maximum prison in Rhode Island. So we did that. Here we go, another problem. State of Connecticut wouldn't accept the money from Rhode Island. What to do? Okay, they went to the University of Connecticut and said, could we directly give you the money? And they said, but of course. So again, never give up. Find the doors to get in. You may not see it, but find it. So we were able to go over to Rhode Island and do the same thing over there. It was a little different because it was a much more one of punishment. Rehabilitation had not really begun there. And so most of the performances for Maximum would be done in-house. In fact, what we did with Maximum Prison in Connecticut was we videotaped the work of those that would not be able to go out on tour, so that we interspersed our public performances by showing the videos of those who could not. So they all felt that they were included. And that being included is what is so missing these days. Everybody is isolated. And I think that's what made it work. Well, things even got better for us because the university didn't want this to end. I did take time out to have a child. And in 1976, got a call from Department of Corrections saying, we want you back. Can you do staff training? Oh, okay. For whom? For our parole officers, because we're having difficulty. They had halfway houses by then, but the transition was not working. And we feel if you can develop and do role plays and work with them the way you did with the inmates, that this will help them, and we'll have training tapes for our staff. Well, here I am. We're still in the 70s, and I go and meet the parole officers. Not one woman among them. And I'm, what, 36? They take one look at me and they said, you are here to do what, lady? And I said, I'm coming to be your trainer. And they said, oh, okay. And I said, all right, where's the bar? Where do we meet? And that's what we did. You have to meet people in their own space. You've got to say, I think I know who you are. Get to know me. And we worked so well together. We produced a tape for parole, and we were able to put together what we called Media and the Arts for Social Services at the university that became a library of all the video training tapes we had put together. We were able to distribute all of these around the country. Our tapes were put in use nationally. So it not only was a regional effort, but we were able to make it one with national significance. Because of that, things were happening. People that were in theater education, they were meeting, and my husband went down and started meeting at Cell Block Theater with Ramon Gordon, and he got to meet the psychodramatists and Zerka and Gertrude and all those, and they decided, let's put together an organization. So in 1979, NADT was birthed. And I can tell you, I heard the stories that came out of it. It came out as an explosion, but we were born. And in 1980, we were asked one more time to present. And this was at the American Correctional Conference in San Diego. And that was specifically sociodrama, alternative training in corrections. That for us was wonderful. And it was at that time I met two people who have made a great difference in my work and my life. In my work, I got to spend time with Zerka Moreno, and we showed her what we were doing. And we said, should we just do sociodrama? And she looked at the body of our work, and she came and did some of her workshops at UConn and said, stay with what you are doing. Don't feel you have to do what others do. Find what you do. Put it together for yourself. And you've already done that. So she applauded that, and we felt affirmation because we really, really thought she was a great lady. The other person I met was Robert Landy. Robert was in charge of putting together a program at NYU, and he had heard about us. He wrote a letter. He said, can I come up for the weekend? So he came up, and we're still working together. Never stopped. Commitment to corrections, commitment to almost everything. Great lover of Brecht, by the way. So that also was wonderful. I had one more thing that I did in corrections. There was a period of time between the staff training with parole officers. By then, we were being asked to work with many, many different social service agencies. And I'm not going to go through that at all, except it included Planned Parenthood, 10 social service agencies that were working with the Puerto Rican community, drug and alcohol abuse with high school students. We did workshops all over that area because it was needed, and I could work with another university and a social worker. Out of that grew a dual degree that was offered in theater and social work at the university, as long as we were there. And we graduated 2 students with that. The last, and perhaps the most unique work I did in Connecticut was we were sought out by a man by the name of Dr. Nicholas Groth, who was the leading expert in sex offenders in the country. He had a program at the maximum prison in Connecticut. He sat in on classes that we held, saw our work, and he said, please, I need you. He said, what's happening is that in the traditional treatment and way I work with sex offenders, I'm reaching a wall. I can't break through. And I think the way you work would do it. I trust you. I see the quality of what you do, integrity. He said, come back to the prison, and I will not sit in, judge, or anything. You have my full, complete cooperation. So we did that. And he gave me a man that was in prison who was sort of a trustee type because he had a degree in psychology from Hunter. And he was given to me as sort of an in-house assistant to help with video. And together we worked for 2 years with a sex offender program. At the end of it, it was making such a difference in Nick's program that the whole program became a special report for CBS, and I have shared that with you. That to me was a beautiful way to end, for me, what I shall never forget. But I took one thing away, and my promise to the men was, I never worked with women, by the way. I only worked with men. Everything that I realized and learned from their role plays, most of their trouble went back to when they were 8 to 10 years of age. I learned from them. I learned so much. And I made a promise that if I ever have a chance to work with children, that's what I'll do. And that's what I did. I came back down to New Orleans, 1983, went into the schools and worked as a drama therapist. So it's been a long journey. It's been different, but mainly nobody handed me anything. Nothing was there before. It was a blank piece of paper. Be open. Volunteer. Take risks. Open doors. Find people that are the right people for you. It's a journey. I think my strength probably grew out of my childhood experiences of just wanting to go where I couldn't go. Because growing up in the 50s, I mean, thank goodness for James Dean, who at least gave us a voice, but we weren't allowed to do anything. We didn't know anything, we couldn't do anything. So I was curious. I was just a curious person. And I felt very safe and always had people to support me emotionally. And that was important. But I am a risk taker. I'm not a rule breaker. And that is important. You can't work in prisons if you do not work within the rules that are there. You just can't. So you have to learn to educate, to adapt, to demonstrate, and to show how things can be I don't want to say bent, but in time, how things can change. And we were there long enough to make that. But you do have to adapt your craft. Mine was coming from theater. And, you know, I didn't want to go in and be a theater director. I wasn't. In fact, whenever possible, we would identify an inmate who could be a director. And in fact, the nights that we were not there at the one facility, they allowed the ones who were working on a play to come to the library and meet and rehearse, even when we weren't there, so that the program had a real change in the routine and what they could do, even when we were not there. And I learned to work with systems. The politics are there. You have to deal with it. Don't be naive for a second. And you can be very nice, but you really need to know the big picture. So that's my strength. My weaknesses? I'm very empathetic, as you can tell. It's hard. However, I constantly practice distancing, so I could do it. And the process, the way it evolved, allowed me to allow them to speak and share their emotions. I could be touched by it. I could affirm what I saw, but at the same time, it's hard. It's hard not to care. I did. Social justice, I think I see as my role in my career is I've always wanted to be a change agent, a social change agent. I think we have the power to do it. I think the power of our work, most of us work in our own ways, because that's the way it probably should be. But the power of our work allows us to do things and go places and demonstrate and get things to be changed. Now, you also have to know that you have to have this other skills. For example, at UConn, I insisted we have to have a course in writing grants. If you don't know how to write grants, if you don't know how to write reports, whoa, you're gonna have trouble. There are certain skills that you have to, certain intensives that you need in order to do that. But for me, I've always felt, what if you can get in, and that's the big question, if you have to be able to demonstrate and articulate what it is you want to do. You can't go in as a theater, I'm a theater person and we're going to do plays. It might play in Peoria, but not where I've been. And in fact, I wasn't even allowed to go into San Quentin when we were making a national tour because they didn't let women in. And I never said, by the way, when I went to Rhode Island, that was like going from a wonderful Connecticut prison. Rhode Island was one of these out of the movies that I remembered. Stone, grim. To get to the library, I had to walk through the cell block, past the men. And I felt, oh, you know, I just felt for them and for me, because it's just, what can I say? Here I go. It was very hard.
I think you've shared a bit of this, but expounding on what attracted you to this work.
Well, I think I have to go back to the movies. I was at the movies all the time. And once I got through with Roy Rogers and Westerns, then they had a whole bunch of gangster movies. And again, good guys and bad guys. And go into prison and you'd rat on people and you do this and do that. So I had these images of something that really was not real. It was REEL, not REAL. And so I had these images, and like the secret garden, I wanted to open the door. I wanted to go in and see, is that really what it's like? And of course, I found out. It was filled with humanity, forgotten, lost, giving no hope, no opportunity. And I didn't want to leave. I just didn't want to leave. So I worked hard to make sure that we could keep getting funding and get support and go back whenever I could. The inmate that assisted me at the maximum prison in the sex offender unit shouldn't have been there. He was from New York. He had been set up by his brother-in-law for a plea deal to bring in drugs. Just a marvelous human being. And Nick knew it too, Dr. Groth. So working with him, and I will not say his name because he has gone on to do so much. I went to the commissioner. And by then it was a different commissioner, another one who was progressing. Can we get this man out? And he said, well, the only way possible would be an educational release. So I went back to the university and I said, we want him. So they gave him a full scholarship to the graduate program, and the commissioner granted his release. He completed the program with us and went back with me, and we set up what is called a research study, probably one of the earliest. For his thesis was, and I'll give you the title of it, Sociodrama as a Technique for Developing Interpersonal Competence with Sex Offenders. And it was a research study done from 1981 to 83. And it was to validate short-term crisis intervention for the troubled areas that Dr. Groth said he was having difficulty accessing, where the blockage in the personality occurred. And with the help of Dr. Groth, we had the group at the prison. We also had a definite selected group of students at the university. They went through the same role plays. They did the same thing. He set it up as a perfect research. And the results validated the sociodrama process that we were using. And you can read about it in Video Therapy and Mental Health. It was explained at the correctional conference, and it's been approved. I mean, it got a lot of attention. And I'm very grateful for him because he went back to New York and he has had an extraordinary, successful life. And I'd like to tell you about something that happened here. I worked with the expelled students in the high school, and there was a young man, and I will give you his name. His name is Kenneth Barnes. Kenneth Barnes I had for 3 months. The next time I saw Kenneth Barnes was in the jail. That was just the next year. He was getting into trouble, but he was in the school jail. Then I saw him some years later, and he had been identified as the first person who would get the death penalty in Louisiana. And I mean, from this man here, Attorney General, who really wanted desperately to have a death penalty. So I was sought out to find out more about this boy. I didn't want that for Kenneth. He had worked so well. He was so quiet. And I knew here he was when I met him, He was at a reading level below third grade. He had probably head injuries. He had also never been helped by anybody in the school district at all. And now he was facing the death penalty. They asked me if I would go and testify at court. And I said, absolutely, if you'll let me bring in something. I have to bring in some evidence. And they said, you have something? I said, oh, I do. I said, because the Kenneth that you're describing and what he did, I said, he's been set up by these two other fellows. I know it. I took with me, because even though he was quiet and couldn't read well or write well, on Fridays at the jail, I would show films. I showed Schindler's List, In the Heat of the Night, films that were just filled with empathy and understanding. And they would be asked to write a critique afterwards in any limited form. And I would give an award for the best one. He won it for 3 films. And the reason was not that he could write well, it's because he could feel so well. The empathy in what he said, the goodness he saw in people, how he expressed that. I started to read it, and a member of the jury said, stop, can we stop? Could we have copies made of those critiques and have a chance to read them before we proceed? And they did. And I'm looking out of the side of my eyes thinking, all I want to see, all they need is one to deadlock this jury, because they were sure he was going to get death penalty. And I saw somebody do this with their coat and hang their head. And I thought, he's not going to get it. And sure enough, they spared his life. They spared his life. One of the best days of my life. They called me at midnight to tell me he had been spared. So you never know what the work is. That's why I keep so much. It's because you never know how much the work you're doing can make a difference in another person's life.
Thank you. What would you see as your ideal of working with the incarcerated?
The ideal is that others have the same opportunities that I did, or make them happen, that you're not just working with the incarcerated, but that you are working with everyone who has any kind of an effect on the men, the decision makers, the officers. Don't leave out people. You've got to have inclusivity. You've got to have communication. Look at it a bigger picture. Yes, you're working with a group. Yes, you have to be devoted to what their needs are. But their needs will never be met if the other people around them are clueless. It won't happen. So you have to be looking for other ways to work, to educate, inform, and show that those who we have locked away it's the humanity of man. I mean, we shouldn't be doing this. In the schools, please go back. Remember, they were children. We've got to stop this. We've got to get teachers educated better. We've got to get the curriculum changed. I was a part of the team that went in and did the art standards for theater back and forth to DC for a year and a half. They didn't want to put in the very first part of the standards, which is you work with the interpersonal, with the self. They immediately wanted to go with what could be tested. And I said, no, we've got to have the emotional. We've got to have the self-identity. If you don't do that, you're not going to be able to develop anything. So if you have the opportunity to take your skills as a drama therapist into working with children in the neighborhoods, those who have been exposed to trauma. And my goodness, you could almost go anywhere in this country today between hurricanes and fires and floods and whatever, and mass shootings. They're traumatized already. We're traumatized by watching the news. And I also found out when I went back after Katrina, I not only had to do drama therapy with the students, I was doing it with the faculty. I was doing drama therapy with entire staff because they so needed the process that we can provide them. So go to other places. Go to law enforcement. See if you cannot find ways to work with police, law enforcement people, parole, probation, whatever. Because if you don't, it won't work. It won't work. Children now, particularly with what we've learned with the neuroscience and how children develop, we need to learn as much about that as we can and bring that into the work that we do and how we work with children. But go to the children and help them, please.
And two more questions. Second to last is, how do you see this work influencing policies beyond prison or for post-prison?
Once they see the outcomes of what we do, you have to be pretty stupid not to want to keep us around a little bit. I was fortunate in that my last school was the alternative high school. The principal had been the former hearing officer for the city of New Orleans, for the public schools. And he left it because he said, I'm tired of expelling these kids. I want to have a school where I can give them the help that they need. So he contacted the arts education office where I was in charge of drama and said, could you help? And I said, absolutely. So I ended up going there, leaving the office and going to the school. And that's what I did. And we integrated drama therapy into every core curriculum in the school. It was not a pullout. It was not anything that was you need help, go see her. I went in, history was taught. 45 minutes of whatever the history was for that day, and 45 minutes I'd do that same lesson through drama therapy. And grades went up, attendance zoomed because they love drama. And we brought in an art therapist. We need to get in there, but not as just a frill, just as something that you pull kids out for. No, integrate it. We also found a course on the books that might be out there for others, strategies for success. And I team taught it with the social worker, the counselor, and the nurse. And that provided a different kind of experience. You're educating your colleagues. That's why I say we need to go to allied professional conferences. We need to team up with other people. I've always teamed up with social workers and other people. And I can't imagine not doing that. It will change. Teacher training, by the way, desperately needs us. If you have any possibility of affecting a change, they are not prepared for what they find in the schools. Just not prepared. And therefore our kids are failing. Our charter schools, closing them down every year, more closed down. Then they just switch them over again. Nope, not working. Come to us. Please come to us. change the climate of the prison. Just as you have found out that when you're there and you can communicate and offer something that is positive, that all people and staff can relate to, there is a trust. The relationships change. They reform. We actually are reforming. This is prison reform at its best. You do it from the inside out, not from the outside in. And this is what we do. If we can get in, because you'll probably hear some of the testimonies of the inmates in my group, but they lose their identity. And what we do is we allow them to rediscover who they are. I'll never forget, and I can't remember who said it, but I've always remembered the line: if I cannot share with you my feelings, I cannot tell you who I am. And I think that that is what we're all about, sharing ourselves and our feelings. And that is what we release. That's what we bring. And so if you have that in the prisons, you will find that there will be a positive change that will happen in time. It will happen. I'd like to give my advice to the players. I'm not Shakespeare, but I'd like to give some advice. Find your journey. Open those doors that you feel are locked. I hear that all the time. I can't go there. I can't do that. Find a way. There'll be resistance and it may be a struggle. You can do it. Go to places not only that you haven't gone before, that perhaps we have not gone before. But don't go alone. Work in teams. Make partnerships. Collaborate. And decide finally, what is your mission? What is your mission? And make it possible, not make it impossible. No mission should be impossible. And I also would say that you have a role to play for all of us in drama therapy. And that is, what is your role and what can you do to help make this happen? Serve on boards, participate, talk to each other, work together. We're creative. And that's what I think we too often forget. We don't have to copy what somebody else has done. Be original. Be creative. And thank you. I've loved this.